Anyway, good evening. My name is Patrick Mosolf, and I'm running for Congress here in Virginia's 2nd Congressional District. Originally, I'm from a small town in Ohio called Point Pleasant, Ohio, and I commuted to school in Cincinnati. And as a young man, I decided that I wanted to commit my life to social change. I wanted to change the world. I had very idealistic goals, even at a very young age. A lot of that was influenced by my aunt. I went off to Northwestern University in order to study for my bachelor's, and my aunt was a civil rights activist in Chicago, and she had a lot of influence on me, and that's kind of where I got a lot of my idealism from. So after having that goal, I first implemented by going back to my home city of Cincinnati, and I worked in a low-income community called Over the Rhine in Cincinnati, Ohio, about 70% black and 30% white. And I worked with low-income communities and homeless people. I became the director of a homeless shelter for 18 people, and later went to work for Cincinnati's largest homeless shelter. And all this time I've been studying about different issues around the world, things like all the wars that are going on, political problems, dictatorship, environmental destruction, all the different environmental problems. And I got to know more and more. It was kind of like a personal research project. And I decided to go overseas because I felt like, the real poverty is overseas. So I did that, and I started off in Morocco and went all the way over to, my first job was in Turkey as an English teacher in Turkey. Kept going east, spent a long time in India, and my first job going back in the nonprofit sector was in Cambodia. Started looking around, found work in the nonprofit sector there. And I got involved in fighting for people's human rights. So Cambodia was kind of like a very authoritarian country, one party rule. They still had elections, so we were hoping to have a peaceful transfer of power in order to make it more democratic. So essentially I became like a democracy activist, fighting for political rights, monitoring elections, and that led me to start to work for the UN mission in Liberia. I went to Liberia in 2005, right after the end of their civil war, devastating civil war in Liberia. For many, many years, many people died. The situation in Liberia is almost indescribable and almost beyond the comprehension of an American person to imagine what it was like there at the time. With all the refugees, IDPs, completely unpaved roads, lack of food. I had to live in one small town because I was implementing the elections there. And all the houses that we could rent to live in were had bullet holes in them. And we had to find housing on the local market, and they said, okay, well, you can rent this one over here. No windows, maybe you could just tape up a screen or something. Fortunately, I got to stay in a local Catholic school. That was the best I could get. I was one of the lucky ones, actually. So after working in the 2005 election, which was successful, that was under the UN. Ellen Sirleaf Johnson won that election. She was a very hopeful candidate. She was a former World Bank employee. I stayed on to do humanitarian work, humanitarian coordination. And then after that, I decided to get my master's degree. I did my master's degree in the Netherlands, in the Hague, Netherlands. And my study was about human rights, development, and social justice. After that, I went back to Cambodia. I did my research about Cambodia, and I started supporting political freedoms again in Cambodia with a local organization. And then I got my first break working with the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID or USAID. How many of you have heard of USAID? Okay. Okay. So USAID was a federal agency, very similar to the State Department, except that its main objective was to work with organizations overseas in order to bring benefits to local countries, like in humanitarian aid, in agriculture, and things like water, health, a lot of terrible health issues that we never experienced in this country. And when we think about it from the U.S. perspective, it's all about self-interest. It's all about building a diplomatic relationship, making the United States look good. There's a lot of skepticism about the U.S. overseas. In Africa and the Middle East, a lot of skepticism about the United States And USA was like the positive face of the US government. It's something that won us a lot of friends overseas. Unfortunately, for some unknown reason, which doesn't really make any sense, I still struggle many times to understand what they were thinking, actually. The Republicans just sort of soured on aid, and they, at the beginning of the Trump administration, they just went after USA like it was a scapegoat of some kind, and they just kept attacking it and completely shut it down under Elon Musk's Doge funds. So now we have no USA anymore. But anyway, getting back to my personal story, I worked for USA for 3 years in Cambodia. Later, I continued working for international NGOs. I went to work in Burma, Myanmar, a country that has suffered a lot under civil war. A lot of this was around rule of justice, human rights, working with the Attorney General's office, working with the Supreme Court there in Burma. This was when Aung San Suu Kyi's party was actually in power before the military coup. After that, I went back to USA again with Bangladesh. I went to Bangladesh with USA, Neil and I shared that connection. And I was working there with the refugee populations that flowed over into Bangladesh from Myanmar. One of the most persecuted minority groups in the world are Rohingya refugees. And my final position with USAID was in Lebanon. 3 days after the October 7th attack of Hamas, I arrived in Lebanon. I don't know how many of you are following the news now, but Israel often has a military conflict with southern Lebanon because of the presence of Hezbollah. So I was there under very difficult security conditions. At one point, there was like a huge demonstration down at the bottom of the embassy. And I was actually packing my bags thinking I would have to evacuate by helicopter. But all this time I was working on these issues related to political processes and elections, about good governance, how should government work, what makes a government effective, anti-corruption. This was kind of my background in my career when I was working with USAID, these nonprofit organizations. And I've looked at so many different policy issues that I feel confident that I can address policy issues in many different areas that we need here in this country. And when I saw what Donald Trump started to do, I realized that I want to run for office also. There's only so much that you can do from the sidelines from the nonprofit perspective, so I want to actually run for office and help this country by being in office myself. So, Neela has brought up a number of times about the campaign finance reform. This is an excellent area to focus on. I keep reading articles every single day about the role of special interests or powerful lobbying groups in influencing our elections, influencing our political process in ways that are harmful to us. I think it was just yesterday that I was reading about how the AI industry is going after one particular Democratic candidate because that candidate actually supported regulation of artificial intelligence. Just kind of common sense regulations, but the AI industry doesn't like it, so they're going straight after him during this election. Guys running for Congress in New York. Other examples, the crypto industry. You do anything the crypto industry doesn't like, if you want to regulate it somehow that they don't like, they're going after it. Maybe very relevant in this election is the influence of AIPAC. Pro-Israel lobby could be very influential in this election. There was a story just a couple weeks ago, a Democratic primary. One of the candidates was, actually he was pro-Israel, he liked Israel, but he just said our aid to them should be conditional. Meanwhile, they had another Democrat in the race. She was talking about the genocide in Gaza. She was very critical of Israel. But AIPAC, for some reason, they decided to attack the moderate Democrat. They attacked the moderate Democrat so much that he lost the primary. This more extreme left-wing Democrat, and now she's the Democrat candidate. So we see AIPAC interfering a lot in our country. Another example, the food industry. The food industry groups are interfering in order to try to prevent things like safe food, reducing pesticide usage, making sure that our children are getting safe food in schools. So I commend this effort to do more about the interference of these lobbying groups in our political process. However, I think we have to be realistic that the Supreme Court is stacked up behind them. How many of you have heard of Citizens United? Citizens United court case. Unless we can get that overturned, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be very difficult. So, you know, I'll be honest with you, it's going to be an uphill struggle in order to bring our democracy back. But this, as someone who's worked a lot on democracy and governance, this is the kind of thing that I've spent my entire career thinking about how we're going to reform our system. How many more minutes do I have?
5 minutes, wow.
It is.
That's great.
So I'll branch out a little bit from that. But when I look at the United States right now, I feel like we're a country that is facing multiple crises. We have the climate crisis. We have the debt crisis. I believe the issue with AI is becoming a crisis. We have crisis in the world. Crisis like what's going on in Israel or the war in Sudan. But now, with the election of Donald Trump, we have new crises added on top of it. You have 2 big crises added on top of it. You know, when I just take a cursory look, I see 2 new crises on top of it. One of them is the Democratic crisis. I mean Democratic with a small d. Donald Trump is assaulting our democracy in a way that I never imagined I would see in the United States of America in my lifetime. I keep saying it's so ironic that we're 250 years since the signing of the Declaration of Independence, but yet at the same time, we're actually facing perhaps the greatest historical threat to our democratic system ever. How many of you are familiar with what I'm talking about what Donald Trump is doing? Right. I think you probably have some idea what I'm talking about. It's all about the balance of powers. This guy is basically using the executive branch, and he is completely invading on all kinds of things that the executive branch is never meant to get into. Not only the other 2 branches of government, but our lives as U.S. citizens. So we need to do something. We need to stand up in order to stop this. That's one, the democratic crisis. The other big crisis that Donald Trump has introduced that we didn't have before, on top of the climate crisis, on top of the debt crisis, on top of the AI crisis. The other one is our relationship with other countries, the foreign affairs crisis. Why do I say that? What has Donald Trump done since he's got into office but alienate almost all of our allies through arbitrarily imposing tariffs on them, by refusing to help Ukraine and therefore putting Europe at risk, basically by giving the middle finger to countries like Canada, giving the middle finger to our historical allies in Europe. What did he do? He said, I want to invade Greenland. We need to take over Greenland, which is the territory of Denmark. The United States has lost so much confidence and so much trust with other countries around the world that people say that it will take decades, no, I shouldn't say that, maybe many, many years to rebuild the trust that Donald Trump has violated. So basically, we need to turn back the tide from what Donald Trump is doing. I have a couple lists here of things that I would like to talk about. So that's kind of the negative side of it. The positive side of it is what do I want to do when I get into Congress? Now, I think it's important to realize there's 435 members of Congress, so we can have realistic expectations about what one person can do. But ideally, I would work on issues related to fairness, equality, DEI, which has been rolled back. I definitely think we need to have a more rational approach to AI. We need to have somebody that's really able to take a look at AI. Is anyone here in the audience afraid that you might lose your employment opportunities due to AI? Anyone concerned about that? Right. Yeah. Maybe your own children. Exactly. You look at young people now, what do you tell them about what they're supposed to study? So we need someone that's going to look at that very carefully and try to figure out what we can do. I talked about food safety. I actually think of all the things that the Trump administration has done, it's probably the only thing I can really agree with. I don't agree with the vaccination policy. However, I do think it's good to take a closer look at our food safety and about how the chemical companies that sell fertilizers, that sell herbicides and pesticides, those residues are being left in our food. I mentioned about the national debt. That's completely being left out now. Social Security. Is anybody worried that you might not get Social Security when you get older? few months ago, I read that Social Security is supposed to start running out of money, or actually run out of money in 2033. That's 7 years from now. A few days ago, I read now they're saying 2032 is supposed to start running out of money. So we've got to do something about Social Security. We've got to find a solution. Generally, I would say the whole tech sector needs attention. So I talked about AI, but also think about the role of social media and how social media is affecting our political discourse, how it's affecting our society. So these are some of the things we need to look at. I've also considered about childcare. I don't know if you heard recently, New Mexico State decided to provide free childcare. I'd like to put that on the table. Free childcare in Virginia. As a parent myself, with 2 years and 4 years old, I can see clearly myself, personally, how difficult it is to get by. Maybe one parent can't even work because it's actually better to have them stay at home. Wonderful, thank you so much. I look forward to any questions you have.